Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear. The latest of hundreds of chats Mark, Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyourear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Well, Dave, we should talk about, in fact, we will talk about who the Zeppo Marx of rock is, the band member who, when they left, their band was never quite the same. We should talk about, I think, the Rolling Stone current list of most disappointing albums ever, and about Taylor Swift and whether or not our government has ever been so enthralled to an American pop star. But why don't we start with that post, which I think you've seen, that Chrissy Hynde put up. Did you see that?
I've got it in front of me. I'm going to read it out.
I've got to read it out.
She posted this on Instagram. Hi, all. First of all, thank you to everyone who's come to see our shows. We're in the home stretch of this year's tour. It's been a pleasure. Fantastic cities, fantastic audiences. We had a great time playing, blah, blah, blah. One thing we feel obliged to explain. When we go on tour, the whole point of it is for the band that we are playing for a different audience every night. That's why we go on tour. So if we're in Edinburgh, like we are tonight, we look forward to seeing local faces. This is what makes it new for us every night. We appreciate those of you who follow us and buy tickets for multiple nights. So please don't be offended if we request you to move out of the front row. All we're asking is that you give the local fans a chance. This is what keeps it new for us, especially after being on tour for so many months. Well, this turned into one of those kind of storms on social media. The amount of umbrage that was taken as a result of this was entirely out of proportion to the amount of actual inconvenience or not that might have been occasioned in the actual physical world. You know, it's just the kind of outrage had legs of its own, doesn't it? Really, that's how these things work nowadays. You know, it's kind of like. It's like announcing that the next England football manager will be Thomas Tuchel, and it doesn't start until next year. But already the amount of hot air is just
gives us months of opportunity to slag it off,
pontificate, and editorials and so forth. But what do you think? I mean, I tend to side with Chrissy Hynde on this.
I could not be more sympathetic. Because what she's saying is, in a very polite way, imagine you're on tour every night and you go out every night and you want to feel, these are Liverpool people.
Yeah.
These are Bristol people. These are Chester people. And you see the same people every night. And they're going to be, by definition, the least excited to be there. And I'm not saying this shouldn't be. Of course, it's wonderful. You know, it makes them enormously happy to tick off every single Pretenders gig and to follow the band around the country. But they're going to be the least excited because they've got a million other shows to compare. I'll tell you the example for me with Bob Dylan. That we used to go and see, my wife and I, Claire and I, used to go and see Bob Dylan pretty much every time he played in London. And she would go for every single London show, and I'd go for the first one and the last one. And we used to get those tickets through a mate who had a bit of an in and would get an early shout on the front row tickets. And so therefore, when we went, it was always the same people. And they were the same people, Dave, who'd be there in Liverpool the next night, and then they'd be in Portsmouth, and then be whatever. And you just don't imagine what it'd be like for Dylan to come out every night, because they have a million other concerts to compare it with. And their criteria are completely different. They're there a lot of the time, arms crossed, impressed me, aren't they? They're kind of, they're looking at it from the point of view, oh, that's the 37th time he's played Blind Willie McTell in a city that begins with L. You know, they've got a totally different, rather statistical way of looking at things. And that must be really hard. And they tend to wear the same clothes and look the same. They're wearing their Dylan gear. and they're not excited to see you. What you want is the people who are absolutely thrilled. It may be the first time they've ever seen Bob Dylan. It may possibly be the suspected the last time. Those are the people that you want in the front that you can react to. That's the kind of energy that you need, don't you think?
I think so, definitely. I think also we the public have no concept of just how visible the first few rows are to the people on stage. Those are the people they look at. They can't see anything at the further back.
No, because they're the ones
got
on the
no
top.
idea at all. And so they tend to, very quickly clock the first few rows. And it can be faintly depressing if you see the same people all the time. You think, oh, are those the only people who like us? Are those
but also, that's how you gauge the audience reaction, isn't it? Those are the people at the front. If they don't appear to be in any way ecstatic, in any way changed by anything different you do or play, then you're wondering if you're actually getting through to people. Whereas beyond that, you probably are, but you can't tell. There used to be a guy who used to go to see Dylan every time, and he used to wear the same hat with a big peacock feather in it. Whenever Dylan sang Mr. Tambourine Man on the line, Dance Beneath the Diamond Skies with one hand waving free, he would take his hat off and wave it 3 times around his head with the peacock feather and put it back on his head. And you'd think, Dylan must have noticed this. The band must notice this. Every night when they play in Europe, the same guys there, the same guys doing the same thing. And it must be sort of dispiriting and unsettling, really. What you want is spontaneity, don't you think?
No, definitely. But also, you have to recognize the fact that this kind of serial gig going is a relatively recent phenomenon. Really.
It is.
If in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s, very few people went to every night of a tour. Tours tended to be shorter. You didn't have these epic tours that you have nowadays.
Yeah.
I don't feel that you did, and people didn't travel as readily. That's the other thing. Actually, we're having a discussion in our house recently about the opening of a hotel just near us, and we were talking about people who travel. And one of my children said, "When is the M1 ever quiet?" And I said, the M1 is literally never quiet. If you're on the M25 at 3:00 in the morning, it's just as busy as it is at 3:00 in the afternoon because people are moving around all the time. And gig going has been one of the kind of beneficiaries, if that's the correct word, of this readiness to travel, this readiness to book a hotel, and to follow the Pretenders who, God bless the Pretenders, a wonderful group. They're not the biggest group in the world by any means. You wouldn't have thought they would attract that kind of devotion.
But they've
clearly
still got a sector of their audience prepared to give up months of their life and follow them around Europe.
And I was reading a thing yesterday. Cliff Richard I think he may have already started. If not, it's coming up soon. He's touring in Australia for his 85th birthday tour. And this piece was writing about what a phenomenon Cliff Richard still is in Australia. And they're interviewing women and they tended to be women who'd got tickets for his show. There's women in the 60s and 70s or whatever. And, you got the tickets? Oh, yes, we had to get the tickets. Well, it might be his last one,
Might be his last.
We'd hate to miss that. It's kind of faintly ghoulish, isn't it? This thing that it's stalking, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's stalking with a musical component. It's like, I've got to be there every time. And the other thing that it's kind of analogous to, which I often think about, is football supporters.
It's just like football supporters. Because I think a lot of the time you're sort of expecting defeat, and you're pleasantly surprised if you're not disappointed. But it's kind of it's part of the rhythm of life, isn't it? And it's also, I think, in some way, looking for error, which you can't help. If you're a big football fan, you've seen that team at their best many times, and all you're doing is allowing yourself to be disappointed. They shouldn't have done that. They
But
shouldn't have brought him on.
it's also you feel that, and this is where the analogy with music kind of holds good, really. People feel they kind of own it. I'm a devoted fan. I've been lots of times. I never miss. Therefore, I have some sort of greater rights over this experience than other people have. Well, I don't know if you do, really. Do people who have season tickets to go and see Liverpool or Spurs or anybody, do they care about them or love them any more than people who don't? I don't think they do necessarily. It's just that's what did they decide to spend their money on. That's what they decide is a priority. And there's a sort of ownership, which I'm not entirely sure about, and I can't say. Here's my point. Unless you're talking about, I don't know, somebody who's was very well known for improvising. I don't know, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, or whatever. I can't personally see the point of going to see somebody 30 or 40 times. You've kind of, you've probably got most of what they have after 5 times, 10 times, or whatever. It becomes a form of train spotting, doesn't it? It becomes faintly disturbing, compulsive behaviour, it seems to me.
I don't see what is going to make that the significant event that's going to make that the most memorable of all the concerts you went to see. I was watching Springsteen on the Graham Norton show on Friday night. He made a really interesting point. He said it's one thing he's learned about live performance. He says is that people haven't come to see perfection. The things they like most are when it goes wrong.
Yeah, true.
And I think he to some extent theatrically almost engineers that, actually, where they kind of try and play a song they've never played before, and maybe they know it or maybe they don't, or whatever. But people like that idea that it could go either way. They could make a mistake. They could get it wrong. It could fail. And I thought that was a really good point, actually. And it's true.
Definitely.
What you want, what all those people going every night should really be looking for is the unusual thing that makes it unique, the thing the person says on stage, the song they don't normally play or whatever. It's interesting.
But also at the same time, if you're that bothered about going to see live music, go and see lots of live music, because there's lots of it. It doesn't have to be the same people all the time, You can go and...
it would be more improving, wouldn't it? You're going to play 25 gigs that they're not all the pretenders.
Whatever, Let other people have a go, I always thought...
Dylan played his gig last night in Germany, and an old pal of ours on the podcast, he just sent us an email, Dave, saying that he loved your 1971 book so much and thought that it's very sweet. He'd written to Cat Stevens and said, you should read this. And Cat Stevens, it's right up your street and you're in it. Cat Stevens apparently said he would. But the point is, he gave a copy to Bob Dylan. He put a copy of your 1971 book, Never a Dull Moment, into Bob Dylan's hand. I mean, the chances of Bob Dylan reading that are not enormous. We know that.
I don't know, Mike. I think Bob will...
He rushed off stage early.
He said, I won't stay for the après show party.
I've got a book to read.
He'll go back to his hotel. He'll put on his Star Wars Jim Jams. I could just see him sitting up in bed, and cracking the spine of my still available book.
Look what old John Martin's only just gone and done now.
And he won't be able to sleep. The following morning, he'll turn up for breakfast. He'll be looking over his kedgeree with a kind of circles around his eyes. People say, "You look a bit tired, Bob." He says, I was up all night reading David Epworth's best-selling
book. It, so don't tell me what happened. Don't tell me. It's a book about rock music in 1971. Apparently, I'm in it as well. Oh no!
You see, I tell you what it will have done, Mark. If he had looked at it at all, he will have looked in the index to see if he's in there, won't he?
He will.
He will.
Well, if he is in there, he certainly won't read it. That's the golden rule. If he's not in there, he might, actually. I don't can blame him.
So that's classic. Dear. So we're talking about the government and Taylor Swift's tickets. I've got to the stage now where looking at the paper or, scanning headlines on news sites or whatever, there's a new word for the new code word for wealth that goes alongside kind of swimming pools, Rolls Royces, fur coats. And that expression has got 3 words, Mark, and those words are Taylor Swift tickets.
Yeah.
If you now say Taylor Swift tickets in headline, it suddenly makes everybody go, oh, hang on.
It's like saying, I have an apartment in Kensington.
It's like saying dodgy money, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
It's kind of it's the implication is you can grease people's palms with Taylor Swift tickets. They've got to replace cash, haven't they? Cash has disappeared from our lives. Have you noticed this, Mark? But Taylor Swift tickets are kind of a new form of negotiable currency, aren't they?
Yes.
And it got to the stage now you can barely pick up a paper without being confronted with a new headline about another government functionary or minister is saying, yes, I too got Taylor Swift tickets. And you think I think I read a story the other day saying 15 government ministers. Now, I think this is extraordinary, Mark, because, you and I back in the day used to get free tickets for kind of things, but, tickets were nothing like as expensive as they are now, nothing like as valuable.
But then the deal was we were expecting we might talk about
reviewing them or whatever.
Yeah.
In my experience, these things didn't find their way to government ministers. I don't think they did. Or had they done so, it wouldn't have had the kind of smoke of scandal hovering over it, because it would have been, I don't know, minor member of government in 1984 gets Human League tickets. It's just not the same, is it?
You'd be really impressed.
No, but there would have been, whatever. There would have been £5 or
absolutely
or whatever they are, as compared to what they are now. But clearly somebody in the Taylor Swift universe, whether, I don't know, the promoters, the agent, I don't know, must have thought this could be useful to get tickets to a number of people in the UK government, which is quite extraordinary, really, when you think about it, isn't it? That anybody bothered to do that.
You think it came that way around? It wasn't the ministers asking for tickets. It was them saying, would anybody like some?
Who would they ask? I don't, they wouldn't know who to ask, would they? I wouldn't have thought they would. If you say that, you're not going to ring Wembley.
They'd have people in their staff who'd know, wouldn't they?
Well, would they? I don't. Well, maybe they do. Maybe they do. Maybe it's all changed. But I couldn't help thinking it felt to me like something more likely to come the other way, and particularly when you hear these stories about, she wanted police escorts and so forth. Because of concerns over, possible attacks and all that, all that kind of thing. But I thought it was remarkable that it turned into such a big story, and as I think you were saying earlier, she's American.
She's American. What I was interested about was I can't think of an American star that this country has ever been so, what's the word, enthralled to, really. Elvis Presley never came here.
No. It was Johnny Ray.
Yeah. Prince was still, that was a
while
ago.
Prince was never that big.
Never that big. Michael Jackson, again.
Madonna was. Madonna, yeah.
Madonna was huge. Was huge, but there still wasn't, it wasn't the same kind of absolute 100% devotion. The thing about Taylor Swift is that there appears to be two types. With Madonna, it was still divisive. And Michael Jackson, divisive. And then Prince, there were people who weren't quite aware of who he was. But there's no division with Taylor Swift. You either really like Taylor Swift to the extent that you'd like to pay a lot of money to go and see her, or you generally approve of the idea of her and don't find her remotely offensive. And therefore, there's no one to... with Madonna, there were a lot of people who didn't like Madonna and thought she was cold and difficult and upsetting and leading their kids astray. And I think I can't think of a single American star that's had that kind of universal acclaim and had that kind of impact. Can you?
It's obviously got the stage where, if the call comes in from, I don't know, the promoter or whatever, to the office of a middling government minister, it'd say, I wonder if you'd like to go and see Taylor Swift. That straight away some functionary is dispatched into whatever meeting they're in to press a little note in front of them. It says, 2 Taylor Swift tickets. Do you want them or not? You have to answer now. I bet the meeting gets stopped. They go out because all of these people have got, daughters or wives or whatever who really want to go and see Taylor Swift.
Oh, kudos, the cachet.
This is it. And there is this other dimension that's come into this whole thing in the last few years. Also,
it reflects what it makes you look contemporary and in touch if you go.
That's the point. The male of the family used to be the hunter-gatherer, didn't he? Used to go out and kill creatures.
Yeah.
And get firewood. And so, the only way he can do that nowadays is come home once a year with good news. I've got Taylor Swift tickets. So suddenly everybody absolutely adores him.
That's brilliant.
I'm in the almost unique position at the moment because of the age of my kids and stuff. I don't think there's anybody in my extended family who's particularly bothered about Taylor Swift.
No, exactly.
Whereas I think that's pretty untypical. I think most families there would be, a 17-year-old or a 24-year-old or whatever who would be really bothered, and consequently, and would be aware of how hard those tickets are to find, how expensive they are, and therefore any parent worth their salt is going to somehow come home.
Going to somehow bring home the bacon.
Bring home.
Your
on the end
hunter-gatherer
of a
thing has reminded me of my favourite ever New Yorker cartoon of the caveman sitting in his cave. And on the wall he's got Monday, hunt, Tuesday, gather, Wednesday, hunt, Thursday, gather.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
I think you've seen Rolling Stone's new list of the most disappointing albums of all time, the top 50.
I think
that's cheery, isn't it?
To be fair, Mark, we've all been there. That is at the bottom of the barrel that contains all the filler ideas that, the magazines sometimes indulge in, Because basically the great truth about magazine publishing then as well as now is that nothing works better than a subjective list of some kind. You know what I mean?
It does, because you're never going to agree with it.
Absolutely. Everybody has to read.
People like us are going to start talking about it.
Absolutely. Which we are doing.
Even
if it's dedicated to disappointing albums. And
I thought it was really interesting, though, because it divides up into two kind of areas, really. And one is the majority are just follow-ups to a series of really big records. So Radiohead's King of Limbs came out after the Bends and OK Computer and Kid A and Amnesia and Hail to the Thief and In Remembrance. I mean, it's so incredible 12-year run. So you're bound to be disappointed at some stage. Oasis Be Here Now, same thing. I mean, 2 pretty good records. Listen Without Prejudice, Volume 1. Not a terrible record, but sold 17 million.
My God.
Sold 17 million less than Faith, Terence Trent D'Arby's introducing the hard line, according to Terence Trent. Terence Trent D'Arby was just him being allowed total control over the success of the first. What was it called? No, it was called Neither Fish Nor Fowl, wasn't it? Sorry, the follow-up.
Neither Fish Nor Flesh.
Fish Nor Flesh. Sorry.
I think
can't remember the title. Yeah. So that was following up a huge success, wasn't it? I'm In You by Peter Frampton was after Frampton Comes Alive. The Final Cut. I mean, all those Pink Floyd records have been so good. And Stevie Wonder's Secret Life of Plants. But I think in there, in terms of follow-ups, is surely the most disappointing record of all time, which I can remember so vividly because I was involved with Select magazine at the time in 1994 and with Mojo, and that was the Stone Roses' Second Coming.
Oh, yes.
I mean, there's no excuse, was there, Dave? There was no excuse. They made one record, which was really, really good, which came out in whenever it was, 89, I think. And then 5 long years later, they came out with The Second Coming, which was mortally disappointing.
Well, if anything is 5 years later, it's always going to stink, the big one, isn't it, really? Because the reason it's 5 years later is they've been desperately redoing it and remixing it because even they know it isn't very good. And they just think another coat of paint and it will be all right. Stone Roses, you see, I could never be as disappointed by The Second Coming as you would have been. Because I was never as impressed by the first Stone Roses.
No, I was very invested in the first one.
As you were. And, I never thought it was all that great. So it didn't seem like, such a tragedy. And when I look down this list, I can't help thinking, is there anybody who could ever have been expecting so much of Journey's Raised on Radio in 1986 that they were disappointed by its eventual release? I find that absolutely staggering that anybody was ever expecting that much from it in the first place. The number one on this list is John Lennon's Sometime in New York City from 1972, which, I mean, it's a kind of stinker in lots of ways, but I don't think it's all that disappointing because it's just it's sort of remarkable, isn't it? You know what I mean?
I think so. I'd rather take my eye off John Lennon at the time and kind of rather giving up on him. But I was interested in the fact that he was doing it, and it's what it stood for was more interesting what the record was like. In that respect, it was disappointing. The person who was most disappointed ultimately, I think, was John Lennon, because I was reading something the other day, and it reminded me that John Lennon at that time massive campaign on behalf of McGovern against the possible re-election of Nixon, and I think he felt that after 10 years the Beatles and having the ear of the youth
of the world,
that what he was going to say about contemporary American politics was going to somehow have some enormous impact. And the actual result was, unless I'm completely mistaken, Dave, but not only did Nixon get re-elected, but he got re-elected with a bigger majority.
Absolutely.
And a bigger youth vote than he had before. Lennon came away from that thinking that after all that time and effort, I have made no impression whatsoever. And I think that must have really, really unraveled him to some extent.
I woke up
didn't see that coming.
I woke up this morning and, this is so strange. Do you know what the tune was going through my head, Mark? No, clearly you're not going to know. It was a more than 50-year-old record by The Doors, which I think was on the album Waiting for the Sun, and it was called 5 to 1. Do you remember that song? Okay. Well, if you remember that song, you'll recall...
No one here gets out alive.
There you go. 5 to 1, 1 in 5. No one here gets out alive. And one of the lines is, they've got the guns, but we've got the numbers. Step aside, we're taking over. Very Jim Morrison. And, 5 to 1 was based on the idea that there was, I don't know if it's some strange demographic trick or something, but the idea is the youth ultimately outnumbers the oldsters, and the oldsters have got the guns and so forth. And nobody ever stopped at the time and said, "So, Mr. Morrison, are you kind of encouraging an insurrection against the legal government of the United States or whatever?" Nobody thought that way at all. But I couldn't help thinking how interesting it was that in that time, 69, 70, all records are kind of it was very common for records to have overtly political songs, about the particular situation, Vietnam War, the US government, and so forth. But here we are. Are we 2 weeks away from the United States election? I think we are, aren't we? Something like that. In which, whatever happens, it's going to be very close. Whatever happens, it will be contested in some way. And, as I went to a recording of a live performance of The Rest is Politics the other night at the O2. And, this was one of the questions that was was talked about in the light of the American election. Will there be any violence, whatever? And Catty Kay, who's on the US rest of politics, made the point. Do you know how many firearms there are in the United States, Mark? There are 320 million people in the United States. How many firearms on the Mark?
It can't be more than one.
There are,
Mark.
There are 400 million firearms.
God alive.
So here we are.
The sheer quantity that some people, I don't think I know anybody who possesses one. So
here, well, quite. I was only thinking, if it was drawn to my attention that somebody down my road owned a firearm, I would seriously consider moving. That's how different this country is.
Completely.
I find the notion... In
America, you'd feel safer.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But anyway, coming back to one point, 1969, whenever it was, the Doors, 5-1, 1 in 5. Nobody here gets out alive. Here we are, 2 weeks from an American election. Is there any record on the charts anywhere that in any way refers to this impending event and the possible consequences? I haven't heard one of you.
No, because nobody wants to pin their political allegiance so evidently to the mast.
I don't know. They do that. They're all on the kind of American chat shows, and they're all quite happily saying who they're voting for. But there's nothing in the kind of pop music arena, it seems to me, that kind of reflects that stuff at all. It's as if pop music has just totally given up on that stuff. And if you'd gone back the late 60s, it was a huge part of what pop music was. It passed around ideas. It articulated fears or aspirations. It doesn't seem to do that in the same way anymore. Am I missing something?
No, it's absolutely true. The current business model is that you build yourself up into an enormous celebrity to the extent that people are so fascinated in you that they want the soundtrack to your life, and they want to read. They want songs that express what's happened to you and what you've done, what you feel, and who you're involved with. And projections beyond that, not so much.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
I just want to talk about the passing of the woman who was born in 1947 as Elizabeth Jurist, but if she was known at all to the wider world, was known as Libby Titus, and probably known to you and me, Mark, primarily through a songwriting credit on the Bonnie Raitt album in the early 70s. Is that right?
72 it was. She and Eric Katz, wasn't it, wrote Love Has No Pride, which was a huge song for me and all my pals. We thought it was fantastic.
And it is fantastic.
And
was recorded by loads of people. Linda Ronstadt recorded it. I think Billy Bragg recorded it many years later. I think loads of people did it. And
lots of people have performed it. Elvis Costello's done it live, hasn't he?
Nobody did it better, to be fair, the Bonnie Raitt, because nobody sings songs of desolation more effectively than Bonnie Raitt. Absolutely nobody on God's earth can sing of loneliness like Bonnie Raitt can do it. There's just something in her voice which is just absolutely remarkable. And so Libby Titus had the good fortune to have the one song that she kind of co-wrote that achieved some kind of prominence, was sung by so memorably by Bonnie Raitt. But she did loads of other songs as well. But it's really interesting story. She made her first solo album in 1968 when she was like 21 or something like this.
And then didn't make another record for 9 years or something?
9 years. She went to, she was obviously came from a fairly comfortable background. She went to Bard College in Annandale on Hudson, which Steely Dan fans will recognize that reference to Annandale, because that is the my old school that Steely Dan, that Donald Fagen and Walter Becker wrote about on Countdown to Ecstasy, and was a kind of liberal arts college on the Hudson, and where it had all kinds of famous gilded alumni, like from Chevy Chase right through to, I noted, I was just looking at a list of the people who never graduated. Francis Bean Cobain was one of them. You know what I mean?
Really?
It's obviously the place where kind of well-heeled bohemians sent their children.
Music industry, media arts.
Yeah. And so she went there in, I don't know when, mid-60s or something, but then left to have a child. And she married Barry Titus, who was an heir to the Helena Rubinstein cosmetics fortune. That marriage didn't last that long, but there was a son of that marriage. But then when she left him, she became Levon Helm's other half. So
they had a daughter, didn't they?
They had a daughter, Amy Helm, who was the daughter of Libby Titus. So she was with Levon Helm for quite a number of years. And then and she made another album in 1977, and it's got members of the band on it and all kinds of Paul Simon, clearly immensely well-connected person. And then I think she was Mrs. Dr. John.
She was for a long time.
And then ultimately Mrs. Donald Fagen.
It's a very unconventional domestic setups, aren't
they? Now, all in their way, enormously admirable musicians. But, as you and I have often discussed, what's the qualification for being an ideal husband? An ideal husband is somebody who puts the bins out on a Monday night without complaining.
Without having to be reminded.
That's
right. Just the recycling.
Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, any of those three doing that?
Dr. John going, now, is that plastics? Is that paper? Is it glass? Was that the tins go with the glass or tins go with the... Hang on. Oh, dear.
But anyway, she was the person who got Donald Fagen back into playing live, because she was the prime mover behind the New York Rock and Soul Revue, which was what got him into playing again after he and Walter Becker had kind of.
Which was a little club thing, wasn't it?
It was fantastic.
A regular club thing with Phoebe Snow used to go.
Phoebe Snow. There's a live album. I was only playing it the other day, on which the vocalists are Donald Fagen, Boz Scaggs, Phoebe Snow, Charles Brown, Michael McDonald. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good lineup. And so she encouraged him into playing kind of interesting gigs in interesting places, So she was a kind of she was a promoter, I suppose, an impresario, And you can't help but thinking, I mean, it's such a shame nobody like that ever wrote their autobiography, because boy, I bet they'd have a lot to say.
What an amazing life,
exactly. And it's such a fact that whoever is your personal musical favorite, behind them are half a dozen people who are absolutely vital to them being what they are, and they may be husband and wives, they may be old friends, they may be, I don't know, tour managers or guitar roadies or whoever they are. They are immensely important, and the person is the one who takes all the credit at the front.
But there's someone behind who's managing or just engineering a life where they can be this
nudging
person.
Things, saying, why do you do this? Why do you don't do this, do that,
Tom Waits' wife, really good example.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the more prominent examples, obviously, her in her case. But there must be loads of people like her whose contribution is not sufficiently.
She was the architect of the return of Steely Dan, really, wasn't she? To the live circuit. In fact, generally to the return and to recording.
Yeah, she probably was. Libby Titus.
The Word Podcast, walking the digital dog since 2007.
Okay, if you haven't already done so, please consider joining us as a Patreon supporter. And if you'd like to do that, the way to find out about it is go to patreon.com/word in your ear, and you'll find all the various different levels at which you might participate. And if you sign up at the right level, one of the benefits you get from it is that on the occasion of your birthday, you can join us on the podcast to throw your own log on the crackling fire that is Word in Your Ear. And in this case, that privilege was extended to Phil Turner.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And the log that you want to throw on the fire this week, Phil Turner, birthday boy. Hello, Phil. Happy birthday. The log you want to throw on the fire concerns one of the less well-known members of the Marx Brothers.
Yeah, well, I know you two, you like an obscure showbiz autobiography, don't you?
Yes, definitely.
Even you probably would balk at the prospect of a Zeppo Marx biography.
You see, most people don't even know Zeppo existed.
Exactly.
You know, Harpo, Chico, Groucho, fine, but then Zeppo.
And Gummo. There was a fifth.
Of course,
there was a fifth one. In fact, Zeppo replaced Gummo, didn't he? So there
Zeppo
were
did
five.
replace Gummo. Gummo had a stammer, and he used to be in the act when it was on the stage. He never appeared in any of the films. And because obviously it was the mother who was in charge of the act. And reading between the lines, she negotiated for Gummo to go and serve in World War I because he was the most disposable of them, and the other four could stay in.
Most disposable.
That's your showbiz mother.
That's nice, isn't it?
Gummo hated being on stage that much that he was very happy with that arrangement. So,
You'd rather go to Trench. Oh,
Yeah.
no, getting back to what you said about Zeppo, is that someone once remarked about Zeppo is that he was the Marx brother who looked exactly the same off screen as on screen, and yet he was the only one who was never recognised anywhere he went. So
because he was kind of good looking, wasn't he? If I remember,
He's the heartthrob, isn't he, in Duck Soup?
But he was the only one born actually in the 20th century. He was a fair bit younger than the others.
Oh, really?
A lot younger than the others.
Right.
But yeah, no, he led a fascinating life, and I want to find out what is fact and fiction about it, because the Marx Brothers have got a Mark Lewison chap who's been writing books about them for several years.
Good.
A chap called Robert S. Bader, and the levels of research is just frightening.
So does he do individual books on Groucho and Harpo?
He's done books on Groucho. His biggest tome, he did a book about every single stage performance they ever did.
My God.
A bit like Lewison did the recordings and the live shows of the Beatles, and went on to that. He did a book with Harpo's widow, her sort of biography, that was finally released a couple of years ago, which was absolutely charming, actually. But the one he's always wanted to do was Zeppo, because he thinks his was the most fascinating life. Because boy, was he spinning plates, yeah. Because after he left the Marx Brothers, he became a hugely successful showbiz agent, but he also became an inventor. He invented a thing called the Marmon clamp, which was the device which attached the atomic bomb to Enola Gay and the aeroplanes.
Oh my
God! And presumably worked out to, detach it as well. Yeah, right. And I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. I'm guessing Zeppo doesn't feature in it. But,
I don't think he does.
And this is a kid from the streets of New York. He didn't go to any fancy school. He became this inventor. His other big invention, he was the first person to invent what's now known as your heart monitors. He was the first patent for a wristwatch, which measured your pulse rate. So, I mean, but in amongst all this, he was mixing with gangsters all the time. He didn't lead a conventional life at all. So, that's why I'm keen to read the book. It was going to be my birthday present, but the publication been put back, so it's now going to be my Christmas present. But of course, the thing he's actually most famous for was being a Marx brother.
Yep.
And there are two commonly held views about his career as a Marx brother. One was, what the hell did he actually do? Yeah, because in the films, the other three had specific comic roles, and he was kind of the straight guy or the romantic lead, as you say, because he was the good-looking chap. But I mean, like in Animal Crackers, which is a film which is only about 90 minutes long, he's missing for nearly 60 minutes of that film. He just doesn't appear. Yeah. So you can understand why people think that. I think he was a little bit unlucky because a lot of those early films were straight lifts from their successful Broadway shows, and to make them fit into a film, they had to take away all the music numbers, which he would have had a big part in, and all the lead-ins into those music numbers. So I think that's part of the reason he was that reduced. But it's a hard sell saying he's any good to anyone who watches it now. I think, what was the point of Zeppo? But the other commonly held view is that all the Marx Brothers aficionados, pretty much to a man, agree with the fact that all of the best films were the ones with Zeppo in. Yeah.
Yes.
The first film he's not in is A Night at the Opera, which, was a huge hit and very funny, but it was kind of the beginning of the end. They got progressively worse from there on in. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. They changed studios, and they had their young writer-director died very young. So that's probably the reason it did sort of die a bit. But there's just
although most people are only familiar with the three of them, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah. And they thought it was they actually thought it was the end of the act because he was desperate to leave, yeah. And when he went, they even tried the thought of bringing Gummo back into it. And you think, well, why did they need him? But as a group, they felt he was important, yeah. And there's just something in the dynamic, isn't it? It's just sort of.
So your analogy here is going to be that there are rock bands who have a Zeppo Marx, that after they leave...
Back to music, who are the Zeppo Marx of the music world? In other words, people who are seemingly looking from the outside looking in, they're doing next to nothing to the successful act they're in, but then as soon as they leave, that act is never the same nor as good again. So,
well, in terms of people leaving, Bill Berry from REM, was REM ever quite the same without Bill Berry?
No, not the same.
I don't think it was. I didn't feel the same. I don't think the Birds felt the same after Gene Clark left.
No, that's true. That's true.
I don't think Depeche Mode felt the same after Vince Clarke, no relation, left. And there were lots of examples of groups where people died, obviously, Grateful Dead and The Who and...
having come up with the question, I haven't got many suggestions myself. The two I'd thought of was, you did a rabbit hole on Creedence Clearwater Revival, and I thought you could argue that there were three Zeppos in that band. Because John Fogerty was seemingly doing it all, wasn't he? But yet, and I know there's not the name recognition of, but even his solo stuff, it wasn't as good, was it? It
wasn't as good. It is not as good. He did it all himself in Creedence Clearwater Revival because he was not happy with what they did, so he'd go in and do it again. But the records he made with Creedence Clearwater Revival are streets better than the ones he made on his own. Go figure. It's the same guy.
It makes no sense. And the only other one I thought of was perhaps John Oates. In a sense, the Hall & Oates, when they started out, was quite an even split. I mean, like Abandoned Luncheonette,
it's true.
They did split the singing and the songwriting. But by the time that they were like just about the biggest act in the States in the early 80s, it was probably 80-20 at best, right? And Daryl Hall, he got the name recognition. He had sort of the looks. He was the pin-up of the band. But
he wasn't Hall & Oates.
It's not Hall & Oates.
The solo records were just not as good,
That's so true.
No, there's something about it's just the essential drama of a group, isn't it? Whether it's two people or four people or five people. Once you remove one, the picture changes. The picture is a hugely important part of, what binds us to them, isn't it?
I think that's very true in, an audience member. But I also think, like, in the creative protests, even if they're not writing the songs or whatever, they lose having that sounding board, because if that person's been from the start, they'll be prepared to say if something's no good. Yeah,
Bill Berry, a good version.
If you actually get excited about something, then that will give the creator even more confidence that it is good.
Well, you can see this happening when you watch the Peter Jackson film Get Back. Ringo sits there at the back smoking, but all he does is play the part that makes Get Back sound like Get Back. You know what I mean? And it wouldn't do if anybody else was there at all. He just hears it and he plays it in a certain way. And we tend to...
Which is true of most of his contributions, actually. But he sits there. He's obviously working it out in his head.
Yes.
And then he's just ready to play, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, I mean, drummers, it's always the case, isn't it? I mean, because the nearest one I could think of was, Mick Fleetwood doesn't write a song for Fleetwood Mac, doesn't sing one, and you would have thought, he could have been dispensed with, but no, he couldn't. You know what I mean? Because he's the person, apart from the fact he's got his name above the shop,
the marquee.
But he's the driving force. He's the soul of the group.
Yeah, he is.
You know, and the rest of them would all recognize that, you know, just as the Marx Brothers would recognize that with Zeppo, you know, and with comedy acts, there's a tendency to think, oh, all the talent belongs to the person with the punchlines. No,
Morecambe and Wise.
Wise. You know what Ernie Wise does is every bit the equal of what Eric Morecambe does.
You just beat me to it. I mean, like some of the scenes, the very funniest scenes where he's acting as Groucho straight man. It's like, well, he's teeing up the gags. You know, it's like
completely.
It's a two-man act.
He creates the drama.
Yeah.
It's Ernie who creates. It's Ernie's pretension is what creates the
Ernie also
Eric
represents us in terms of his reaction. It's kind of like our reaction. It's like we're on stage with Eric.
He creates the right rhythm for those jokes, doesn't he? Certainly Ernie Wise did. You know.
Yeah. So there we go. Well, look, that's a valuable contribution to rock scholarship. No doubt in due course somebody will be writing a book about the Zeppo Marx as rock and roll, and this will be considered the starting point for that quest. And I hope you get your book for Christmas. I'm going to look out for these Marx Brothers biographies. I've never really delved into that kind of thing.
No, I haven't.
I feel I would enjoy them. Definitely.
The man who invented the thing that attacked the atomic bomb. That's fantastic.
Have you ever read Harpo Speaks, which was Harpo Marx's? That's a wonderful book. So,
it's such a great title. Really funny.
Supposed to be the nicest man in Hollywood, he was.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, well, I should definitely.
Oh, right, there you are.
Definitely have to look it up.
Unlike his brothers.
Well, Phil, whoever writes this book about the Zeppo Marx of rock, I'm suggesting it should be you.
Yes.
Happy birthday. See you again next year.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.